Philip R. Davies, an esteemed professor of biblical studies at the University of Sheffield, delves deeply into these matters. His assertions have sparked fervent debates within academic corridors. Davies contends, based on archaeological evidence and rigorous analysis of the biblical narrative, that the biblical Israel is more myth than reality. He posits that figures such as Abraham and Moses are not historical entities, and kingdoms attributed to David and Solomon did not exist as described. According to Davies, the biblical depiction of Israel might have been crafted as late as the Persian era, challenging traditional chronologies. Problems with dating the Old Testament to the Persian era. We have very little information about the Jewish population in the Persian era. We have almost nothing apart from the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, and the historicity of these books has also come under scrutiny. Some doubt there was ever even a mission by Ezra. The autobiography of Nehemiah may be no more historical than many other similar examples of autobiographical genre in the Greek world. Biblical historians have traditionally written of the period of Persian rule as time of peace and prosperity. Judah was allowed administrative independence. Jerusalem was organized as a prosperous temple burgher society, but the evidence we have could just as easily be interpreted otherwise. That Judah's independence may be more comparable to modern crumbling societies left on their own and with a great deal of administrative independence to provide a sad picture of local incompetence. Maybe they did not interfere in local affairs because they did not care. The Temple Burgher Society has nothing more than hypotheses to support it, and the account of a band of Greek mercenaries being able to waltz through the empire, kill a Persian governor, and walk out again in Xenophon's Anabasis is evidence of Persian administrative incompetence. The archaeological evidence we need for the Persian period is not likely to come to light. Israeli archaeologists have demonstrated a contempt for the Persian period and removed its remains to rubbish dumps in order to get down to the real Israelite layers. Lemke cites A. Mazar's Archaeology of the Land of the Bible, 586 BCE, as illustrative to this attitude. As for the Hellenistic period, it should never be forgotten that the revitalization of the ancient Near East only became a fact after the Greek takeover. It is an established fact that city life vastly expanded after the conquest of Alexander. Here we must realize what happened in Jerusalem and in Palestine. Innovations that were comparable, although on a smaller scale, to the cultural developments in Syria, Mesopotamia, and Egypt. Scholars may nurse very romantic ideas about what may have happened in the nooks and crannies of pre-Hellenistic Palestine, in a society considerably poorer than the one found there. For example, during the Late Bronze Age. A more worldly and realistic assessment of facts suggests that the Persian period was not the time when the Old Testament could have been written down. Hardly any parallel exists to such a development, but a lot of evidence that says the Hellenistic age was the formative period of early Jewish thought and literature as witnessed by the Old Testament itself. I would refer everyone to Jonathan Adler, the archaeologist, who is confirming much of these statements. In Plato and the Creation of the Hebrew Bible, Russell Gamirkin delves into an intriguing premise. He postulates that a myriad of laws within the Hebrew Bible draw parallels more closely to the works of Plato rather than the traditions of the ancient Near East. Both Gamirkin and Philip Wagenbaum theorized that Plato's philosophical treatises were seminal influences, shaping the biblical author's formulation of idealistic national laws. Russell Gamirkin on Foundation Stories. When we look at Greek literature, we can see that the biblical tales of the Israelites' exodus under Moses and their conquest under Joshua are quite similar to the Greek foundation stories. Even though this kind of storytelling wasn't common in the ancient Near East, it was very popular among the Greeks during the Hellenistic period. This section delves into the common themes in Greek foundation stories and how they compare to Moses leading the Israelites to the Promised Land. Greek foundation stories can be set in different eras. There are mythical times, that's when gods and humans lived together before major floods, like that of Deucalion or Noah. There's legendary times marked by heroes and ending around the Trojan War, and the more factual, archaic, and historical periods. Direct interactions between gods and humans were limited to the mythical and legendary periods. In later times, people would seek advice or guidance from the gods at temples or sacred sites. While some stories were entirely set in legendary times, most foundation tales started with the promises of land made during this era, but the actual settlement happened in the more factual, archaic, or historical periods. Promises of ancestral lands are a recurring theme in many Greek foundation tales. They serve as a foundational myth that supports later conquests and settlements of specific territories. Often these promises were made to renowned heroes like Heracles, Aeneas, or members of the Argonaut expedition. As these heroes journeyed, they would pass through territories that their descendants would eventually settle. Often, gods like Apollo would grant these lands to the heroes during their travels. Even if the heroes settled elsewhere or even passed away in a different land, their divine claim to these lands would be handed down to their descendants. It might take several generations before the descendants actually settled these promised lands. A famous example of this narrative theme is Heraclius' adventures, where he received divine rights to various places during his Mediterranean travels. This narrative style was also used to justify the Spartans' colonization efforts, citing Heracles' journeys. Another example is the story of Cyrene in North Africa. As per the accounts of poets Pindar and Apollonius of Rhodes, when the Argonauts arrived at the Libyan coast, Poseidon's son gave Euphemus a symbolic chunk of Libyan soil, marking it as a territory under his rule. This token of rulership was passed down until Battus, a descendant, founded Cyrene in Libya. Another special case is Aeneas, who after the Trojan War journeyed the Mediterranean but never visited Latium's promised land. However, he was prophesied at Troy that his descendants would create a city, Rome, destined for greatness.